But even within the cities, if you look at Youngstown, which of course you're familiar with, you look at the west side of Youngstown versus the north side and the south side, and definitely the east side. There's a line, there's I think it's Meridian and Midlothian that you can cross, and all of a sudden it changes. And this comes down to possibly, the idea of redlining in the past, where communities were broken up based on race.
For sure.
And I guess, it's a natural thing to want to live around people who look like you or are similar to you. But then when you're denied to move someplace else because of issues like the banks won't lend you a loan, or the redlining issue, it compounds things. And my pet hate here is the idea of the way schools are funded, where it's all based on your housing price, and it's based on your house taxes that we pay on the housing, right? Sure. Which has been it's been proven to be unconstitutional in Ohio, but nobody wants to take it up.
Right.
So you got the east side of Youngstown, which is screaming out for better.
You can't even get homeowners insurance over there.
Right. And it's down to this sort of, I think it's just immoral the way this happens.
A lot of streets don't even have sidewalks over there.
Right. I spent a fair amount of time over there looking around, and it's different. But you look at Poland, you look at Canfield, which are the two little villages down here on 224. They're the opposite end of the spectrum, and it's all based on circumstance and based on your taxes, which I just think is wrong. But I'm sort of going off on politics again, but I guess that was kind of part of the issue here.
Of course.
Is the way the system is set up is kind of corrupt, and kind of if you're fortunate enough to live in a certain place, then you've got all the opportunity you might ever want, and if you come from someplace else, you're kind of stuck.
So what do you think? How do we get past that? And I know, Jamie, you and I have had this conversation.
So there's little to stand in the way of saying this is the richest country, not just in the world, but ever in the history of countries. And with that said, I mean, I know this is a cliched Democrat talking point, but it's money, and desire. So the fact that we don't have this problem worked out is a political choice that's made because I think the evidence is strong. And I'm not claiming to be telepathic or living in these people's heads or hearts, but where you have candidates who don't corporate donor money, you tend to get more progressive results. And let me quickly define progressive. I'm not necessarily talking about anyone's definition of a political philosophy, just more or less progress. Like, you are starting here and these kids are getting the education they deserve, no matter what community they're in. That is a progressive notion. That's a populist notion, a political philosophy that was invented in Kansas, of all places. And, to wrap this thought up, our lives get very much better across a wide variety of topics when and this is a bipartisan issue, by the way. If you look at all the polling on this, not like I'm ever going to trust polling again, but it's really all we have at this point. Right. Corruption and money in politics is something both the left at every level and the right at every level, I'm talking about voters, agree on. To the tune of 70 to 90%, depending on the poll you're looking at. So the fact that we don't have it suggests that the people that we hire to do these jobs are not motivated to be answerable to us.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the politicians.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's not leave the bureaucracy out of this either. Like, honestly, for any advanced democracy in the Western world, or really any government structure, there has to be some institutions, and that is another way to say the bureaucracy. And so you have, for example, this friction right now between President Trump and the intelligence community, or so it's been reported. His issues with them and the IRS, he's had tussles with them, certain facets of the military, and certainly his his lack of ability to hire people into positions in enough numbers to get his agenda across the finish line. That's all part of this too. And I'm not saying that they're bought off. All of this corruption that we're talking about is legal, or a vast majority of it. It rarely is it two guys meeting in a parking garage at the dead of night, making a quid pro quo deal. It's Hunter Biden's son working for Burisma, trading off his dad's name. That's legal, completely legal. It's also a form of corruption. And it's a form of corruption that the more connected you are to the DCCC and the DNC, or the state corollaries of those two groups, or groups like the Lincoln Project, which has emerged, places like that, their primary motivation is to fundraise. They're not necessarily interested in solving anybody's problems. They're interested in making a lot of money. I look at, and I'll end on this, I'm sorry, I'm hogging the mic, but look at Florida, 61% just put in or submitted for approval legislation that brought their minimum wage up to $15 an hour. And that's a state that Trump won handily. So
that came as a shock to me. And I'm confused. Like, I'm really confused when I look at these numbers. I thought, from a perspective of, what I do for a living in project management and looking at data sets, and, I wasn't too afraid that Biden would lose. In order for him to do it again, he'd have to get the Rust Belt again. He got the Rust Belt. My dad was a steel mill worker. There's a lot of people that don't have jobs in Youngstown and in these factory towns. And you saying, I can get you jobs, I'm going to bring all the jobs back, more jobs than you've ever seen in your life. It could be a lie, but if you're desperate, you'll cling to the lie. And so I was not surprised that that the Rust Belt went to Trump. Michael Moore wasn't surprised that the Rust Belt went to Trump. What I am surprised about is in this election, it was this close. I didn't even think it would be close. I definitely didn't think, when he won by 77,000 votes the first time, and he had 11,000 votes. I want to say Michigan, he beat Hillary Clinton by 11,000 votes. I was like, he did nothing to expand his base, and his presidency, objectively speaking, was non-productive at best. So with that being said, is he going to get the 11,000 again? Very likely not. So I wasn't surprised. What I am surprised about is how razor thin these margins are that Biden won by.
But speaking to Jamie's point about vested interests and basically what is the status quo, there are enough people who are happy with the status quo, who make money from the status quo, who benefit from the status quo, that the people who the Democratic Party should be representing, who need help, need a boost, are used for their votes and then pretty much ignored afterwards.
Right.
Along the way. Now, I count myself as a fairly, in American terms, a progressive sort of liberal type from a Labour background in England. But it won't change until somebody takes a really brave step. Now, Sanders was on the right track, but I don't think Sanders was great. He was great with the message was good, but the way it was delivered was just not the good, right? And you're talking about Florida, you're talking about, why was there a large number of Cuban Americans voted for Trump? Because as soon as you breathe the word socialism, people freak out, right. Even though it's messaging, and it's the idea of European socialism, which is democratic socialism, branding, which is basically let's give people a fair shot, regardless of where they're from. So, so my background, my granddad was a coal miner. My parents grew up in project housing, or the equivalent of, but they were given a chance. And then I was given a full ride at college because they didn't make very much money. And so that progressive taxpayer-funded education took me to the point now where I'm a professor, and I've made it, supposedly. Right. That to me takes guts, and what it took in Britain was World War II, and people came back from the war and said, look, we want a slice of the pie. We just fought a war for you, and so my grandparents voted for Labour, the Socialist Party, and they said, right, we're going to give you a national health system, we're going to give you access to education, none of which is free. The problem with the left over here is that we use the wrong words. It's not free. It is sponsored by taxpayers, and everybody has a chance, regardless of what you look like or where you're from. And that's why I'm here. But it just takes that nerve and that over here messaging and that sort of saying the right words to people who will understand it.
Right.
And saying it, we've got to be very careful. We're obviously all educated. We're obviously all, we've thought difficult thoughts in our lives. But you try and tell that to some guy who just hears MAGA. I mean, MAGA was brilliant.
It was.
How can you argue with MAGA?
If you were afraid, if you were afraid of where the country's going, if you're afraid of the browning of America, you don't have to say, I'm afraid of black people, or I'm afraid that there's going to be another Hussein Obama as a president. All you have to do is say, we need to make America great again.
Again, it's
everybody understands what that means.
Yeah, it's a dog
whistle. You in your soul, and you're like, oh, I'll do anything that man asked me for.
Yeah.
And so this last time around, I think this is where we're probably going to part company on agreement. I have no idea if Bernie Sanders' messaging would have stopped him. What I will say is that when it came to his strategy to deal with Latin Americans, even in Florida, he was gaining ground, and he had the highest percentage of Latino participation during the primaries, granted. And he also had the best fundraising organization, was nothing more than small dollar donations. If you looked at the New York Times map of donations, they literally had to separate his fundraising numbers from that map and do a separate one so that you could see everybody else's money. He was making general election money with between $5 and $20 donations.
Yeah.
The other thing real quick to say is his guy, Chuck Rocha, pretty much explained, without any, real data yet to back this up, we're still counting votes and all that stuff. So this is with the information we have now, which is not a ton. But he complimented President Trump's operation in Florida because he was there saying MAGA. I mean, I think that messaging was, but he was saying it to a group of people who have natural suspicions against, like what you said, any kind of socialism. You say socialism sucks, their minds go to,
they think Castro,
Guevara and Castro, and
bad pigs,
that whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
But he was there saying it 6 weeks before Biden even got there, and he had a top-notch operation, speaking in those communities using surrogates who spoke the language and had relationships with those folks, and getting on their YouTube channels that they watched and the television shows that they watched. So I don't know, getting to the point where we might part company on agreement, I don't know that Bernie would have lost, or that his messaging was bad, because he was winning up until Democrats pulled a great move. I can't fault them for it. He lost in South Carolina by the same margin, basically, that Bernie won Nevada. And then Clyburn told all of his folks, even after swearing he wouldn't, and again, I'm not mad at him, hey, everybody, vote for Joe Biden. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck with Bernie. And if you look at the exit polling that came out of South Carolina, 1 out of every 3 folks who answered the poll said, I did it because Clyburn got on the air. And then immediately after that, Obama made a couple of phone calls to Buttigieg and Klobuchar and disappeared them.
So let me ask,
of their own free will. And then, just the last bit of this, and then Elizabeth Warren made the decision to stay in the race, which, if you do the voting math for that primary,
split up the progressives,
he would have he would have remained competitive all the way through Super Tuesday. So this isn't me defending Bernie and saying, he would have done a better job than Biden. I really don't know that.
Right.
But the reason I don't know that is because the narrative is socialism sucks worked in Florida, and I'm not convinced that that's true.
So I'll toss to you, Peter. How do you think Bernie would have fared in some alternate universe where he didn't make it through the primary and got to the general and faced Trump?
So this is an experiment. I'm a scientist. I like experiments. The idea of contact, Jamie. I think you're absolutely right. The idea of getting out there. We lost in farm country. We don't go to farm country.
Right.
We just got hammered locally with a state representative. Our candidate was a wonderful progressive candidate, very, very eloquent, very much the right background. He was a firefighter. He grew up on a farm, right? And he went out there and he started talking to some of the more rural parts of this area.
Who is this guy? What's
Chris Stanley.
Okay.
Chris Stanley. He lost 2-1. And the message we're getting back is, well, you know, Democrats don't come out here. We don't really care about Sebring. We don't really care about these places that are outside of the metropolitan part of Youngstown. And that's absolutely true.
It is.
And this is I you know, maybe it's a bit naive, but we do have a very broad coalition, and we do have to try and keep everybody happy and on board, right?
Right.
So how do we come up with a message that does that? That kind of keeps everybody moving along in the right direction and doesn't peel off too many people.
Fantastic questions. This is the thing. Like, so going back to Chuck Rocha and his Latino strategy, he was there 9 months working in places like California and Arizona and Nevada and Florida ahead of everyone else. No one else was, no one talks to Latinos, to your point, until it's 3 weeks before the election.
Yeah.
They had spent a significant amount of money doing again what Trump did in Florida. It was basically taking Rocha's strategy writ large. He was out there in June. Biden didn't even spend a dime in Florida until July. So you have all of this communism sucks rhetoric, and that's all they're hearing because Democrats aren't there. Not to mention, I mean, again, to your point, this is an effort because whatever progressive you throw out there, 6 months before a contest, if that's the first time these guys are traveling up and down the state talking to people, they're going to lose.
Mm-hmm. You're not going to.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be an ongoing, sustained effort, and the messaging needs to be, you know, you want to call me socialist, or you want to say Republicans are all about making America great again and all that. That's fine. Call it what you want. Here's my idea. This is my idea for this place,
Peter,
and then build a record of getting things done.
Let me make a comment as a foreigner who's
Yeah.
you know, not new to the country, but I am from someplace else. It frustrates me that we do this for 12 months and we don't know who the leader of the left is until late, and
Right.
we don't know where they stand in a very broad coalition on a very broad spectrum of left-wing politics. And it takes all that time to get the candidate and then to get the vice presidential candidate. And then you have a couple of months and a few months left to actually define who we are and define what the politics is. The right in this country seem to be pretty much lockstep in terms of what they're after. And they stick at it.
Always.
And they're like a dog with a bone, and they're not letting go, right? They know what's coming.
Yep.
We are just fuzzy in terms of the message until it's too late. And that comes down to just the nature of the system, how it works. Where I come from, the parliamentary system says that whoever wins the most seats, that, you know, they nominate the prime minister. The prime minister comes after the election, not before the election, right? So you don't know necessarily.
You think that works better?
I think it's from this perspective, I think there are good things about both ways that we do politics in these two different countries. But I think in terms of the thing, the point that Jamie's making is that the message is fumbled until it's too late. And that gives the other side so much time to knock stuff down. If you nominate Bernie, you're getting a socialist. If you nominate Biden, you're getting a guy who's out of touch, right? Whatever, that sort of stuff.
Right.
Other thing that took me too long to appreciate was the presence of the Queen. The prime minister has to go and kneel before her and deliver a report.
Right.
And I used to hate the fact that, you know, when I was younger and didn't know anything, that there was such a thing as a king and a queen. But now looking at the imperial presidency, the royal presidency that we have here, what a great symbol to say you're a public servant and your better is asking you, you know, in that, you know, symbolizing the country, your country is telling you kneel
Yeah,
before it.
yeah.
I
And
love that.
I'm not a big fan of. I'm the only thing I'm a Republican in is British politics, right? I'd rather it be a republic. But the idea of the consistency of 1,000 years of tradition, and since 1200 with the Magna Carta, this idea of the distillation and the coming together of ideas to give us what is now modern British politics, which is partly screwed, obviously, at the moment for various reasons. But my point about if I'm trying to explain to what the president or our presidential candidate is going to give us, we don't know until it's almost too late, right? And that possibly works for both sides because the Republicans, if they lose this time round, they have to come up with a 2024 candidate.
Right.
But you know for the most part what they're going to say, right? You know what their messages will be. We're kind of bouncing between different ideas, and not
the Republicans.
Not in step.
Their policy. I mean, their policies are pretty much their policies every single year, and I think that comes with the idea that they're conservative. Like, there's not a lot of. I hate to typecast, but I'm going to do it a little bit for a second. But conservatism at its core is what we've always done. Like, that's basically what conservatism is. So it's a lot easier to craft a message when your message is what we've always done. Yeah. There's a blueprint, there's a path for it. There's history. Yeah. You already know what worked and didn't. You can always look behind you. Whereas when you talk about progress, you're talking about new ideas. You're talking about bringing new people in with new voices and new points of view. And that is much more difficult to point in the same direction.
It is, but I think part of the issue for me, I consider myself pragmatic. I'm a scientist. I want to solve problems, right? And we do a really lousy job of explaining to people how we're going to solve problems. Trump got away for 4 years saying he's going to have a healthcare idea coming up pretty soon. He said it around the last of the debates. My healthcare plan's coming out soon. Right. And it got ignored in the press because people have heard it so often. Correct. And people out there who might struggle with healthcare, I mean, Oklahoma voted to expand Medicaid this past couple of days, right? Oklahoma. That's a practical issue, a practical problem. Right. That is, the ACA was an attempt to solve a problem. The Republicans have offered nothing.
So with that being said, like, where are we going wrong with the messaging in America when that many people, to the point where we're almost 50-50, where that many people are willing to vote against their own best interest?
Well, that phrase is what I was just going to point out. I think I've learned now to be very cautious with that phrase, voting against their own best interests, especially as a highly educated person. Okay. Because it comes across as elitist and it comes across as preachy. Right. Okay. And in a conversation like that, I never have time to tell my story with somebody because we're in a hurry, right? Whatever. And the fireworks go off. But this idea of now, I think Obama said it best. Obama was really, really smart. And he said, I don't know, it was in the newspapers or on television or whatever. He said basically to Trump, just call it Trump care, right? We're calling it Obamacare. Just call it Trump care. Just change the label. And then it's your plan, and it works. Oklahoma just voted to expand Medicaid. Kentucky had already voted to expand Medicaid. Those are blood red states. So a good idea delivered by a black man, which is working, right, is a good idea. And that's what the Democrats need to do, is to push those good ideas. But part of the issue was the fact that it was Obama, Hussein Obama, right? Right. And those blood red states some people there will just see a black guy and just, whatever the underlying hatred comes out and the underlying racism comes out, the underlying mistrust comes out. Right. And the brainwashing that some of these people have been under. But the ACA, what's the alternative? The Republicans have nothing. Right. And over the next 4 years, if McConnell wants to keep going, McConnell's from Kentucky and they have the ACA Medicaid expansion. If we keep pointing out that these things are good for people and keep asking the question, right? Keep asking the question, the interrogative. What else is there? If you have a better idea, tell me. Right. Trump has been Trump has taken all the oxygen out of the conversation, all the oxygen out of the room for 4 years because his brain is like fireworks and he's distracting everybody. If he's gone off the picture, maybe we have the chance to say to people in Kansas, what's the alternative?
Yeah.